Welcome to Prestige Worldwide. This week I'm going to talk to you about how I caught them here at Lake Cherokee to win $100,000. I can't even begin to tell you how cool it is to say that I won $100,000 fishing. You see guys do it all the time, like Brian Thrift, Scott Martin, Mark Rose, some of these guys. And until you actually do it, it's just like kind of sitting out there in the distance. It's something that you don't even know if you can actually do. But it was pretty awesome, man. Like, it's definitely a game changer as far as my career goes. But I'm going to give you a little in-depth of how I caught my fish. And a little bit later, I'm also going to walk you through exactly what I did to find my fish. So first off, I'm going to start with the baits that I used. So the first day and second day and third day of practice, I actually caught majority of my bass, or I say caught, had the most bites on, was a drop shot. And I was actually drop shotting a Strike King half shell. It's a little small, really just like almost like a creature drop shot bait. If you put two half shells together, it'll look like a little small structure bug. But in this case, it's the half side of it. And I was actually just tying it to a hitchhiker with an 1/8 ounce Strike King drop shot weight, a really tiny drop shot weight. And I was pitching in these holes, and I was finding these fish. I'd shake off a bunch, pull them to the surface, see how big they were, and never have to worry about hooking any of them. Well, I think it was like the third day of practice. I had a couple bites on a wacky rig, actually quite a few bites on it. And so, naturally, I had it on my deck day one of the tournament too. The first rod, though, I picked up was my drop shot because that's what I'd been getting bit on, and I really felt strongly that that's what I was going to catch my fish on in the event. Well, then it all happened. I broke off my drop shot, and I was using an open hook in the tournament with that little 1/8 ounce weight. I broke it off within the first 30 minutes, and probably the best thing could ever happen. So that's when I turned to the 4-inch Strike King Ocho. And I've had quite a few people already ask me, well, why did you go with the 4-inch Ocho? And the thing about the 4-inch Ocho is it's a little bit thinner than other stick baits, and it's still heavier than other stick baits. It's really heavy, but it has a lot of action. It's super soft, so that means it's going to tear up a little bit more than others. But that's what I needed in this situation. I was throwing it on a 1/16 ounce weighted wacky jig head with a weed guard on it. Something else I've been asked, why were you throwing a weed guard one? Well, where I was pitching this jig head was a lot of cover. I mean, there was a lot of snags, a lot of rock, in some cases a little bit of wood, not any grass, but just mainly rock. And it had little bitty crevices everywhere, so if I used a weed guard on it, I didn't get hung nearly as bad as people using open hooks. Case in point, my drop shot, I hung it up and broke it off in 30 minutes. I was much more efficient with this wacky rig, but what made the action so peculiar with this 4-inch Ocho, and remember when I was saying it's really soft, well, what this did is when this Ocho fell through the water, both ends of this Ocho would shake vigorously, and whether it made a difference or not, in my mind it made a difference, and I think it got me a lot more bites on the drop. So typically I throw a weightless wacky rigged Ocho because it is so heavy, because it'll still fall, but in this case the 1/16 ounce gave me just enough weight to cover a lot of water, and I was fishing that on super light line, 6-pound test in fact. This is Seagar and Vizex fluorocarbon, and I was using a actually like a 15-foot leader, and I hadn't talked to anybody about that part, so I was using a 15-foot leader. And there was actually a couple reasons I was using such a long leader. First reason is I was having to retie a lot, because when I'd catch 1 or 2 fish I'd retie immediately, especially if I caught a big one. And so I wanted to have a lot of leaders so I didn't have to keep retying leaders all day long, and because that becomes kind of a hassle, especially when in your mind you're kind of like wasting time. The second reason is what I've started to notice, if I use a really short leader, say a 4 to 8 foot leader, that knot that I use an Alberto knot to tie my fluorocarbon to my braid. it has a tendency when you're unspooling it to either hang on your line coming out or hit your guides a little bit too hard to where it'll fray up and damage that knot, especially on 6-pound line. And so what I noticed, if I put a really long leader on, I reduced that greatly. So I didn't break off fish because of leaders, and I think that made a big difference. But I was using a rod that I actually helped design a while ago, and it's a Team Loose Custom Pro dock sniper rod. The dock sniper rod was designed for shooting docks like they do for crappie fishing. And if you notice on this rod, it has a very fast tip, and I mean, if you notice right there, it's a very, very fast tip, but a lot of backbone. So this was able to, I can load this wacky rig up and flip it extremely accurate, and that was a big deal. And the other thing was I didn't have to worry about my drag as much. So I watched a lot of guys when they set the hook, like they were so concerned about their drags. I didn't have to worry about that because this rod loads so well that when I would hook one of those 3 or 4 pounders, I didn't have to adjust my drag because I could just let the rod play the fish, and I think that was extremely important. I mean, my drag stayed pretty tight the entire time, and I was using that on a new Team Loose Custom Pro reel. The Team Loose Custom Pro reel has a larger arbor spool, so you reduce that line twist and those wind knots and stuff whenever you're making short casts and pitches. And I didn't ever really have to worry about that with this reel and rod combo. Well, then by about the 3rd day, I think they got a little wise to my wacky worm. I still caught a lot of fish on my wacky worm, but I ended up turning to a Ned rig. And for most people that know me pretty well, they know I love fishing a Ned rig. In this case, I was keeping it pretty basic. I was using the same Ocho, the same 4-inch Ocho, mainly because of the profile, the skinniness of the profile. If you look at the 5-inch Ocho or any 5-inch stick bait, it's really thick, really thick. And I wanted that little bit thinner profile that 4-inch Ocho had. So I was cutting it down to about 3 inches, as you can tell. And I was putting it on a jig head, an 1/8-ounce jig head with a sickle hook on it. And it's actually a mustad hook, and that was specially designed for finesse fishing. It's called a skippy hook, and this head happens to be made by Gene LaRue. I actually went to Tackle Warehouse and bought them. I mean, it's just a really good head. I actually helped design it when I was working with them, but by the time I left Gene LaRue, they hadn't had them made yet, so I ended up having to order some. And I'm telling you right now, it's a really good Ned head. It's a football shape. It comes through cover really well, and it also, if you notice, has a weed guard, and weed guards are really important for me this week. All 3 baits that I'm going to show you today all had weed guards, and it's not for weeds, it's for the rocks and being able to fish very slowly through these rocks, and that was a big key. And but in this case, I was still throwing green pumpkin on the Ocho, the Strike King Ocho, still throwing 6-pound test, Invisex fluorocarbon, and I was tying it to a 10 to 15-pound test, Seagar Smackdown braid, and I was using the exact same dock sniper rod, exact same reel, and that was important for this because I kept a lot of symmetry on what I was using. I wanted it to all be the same. I wanted to have the exact same actions of flipping, so I never kind of got out of cadence, and I think that's important when you're fishing. The more symmetry you can keep, the more you can keep things the same, the better off you're going to be in fishing. Well, on the final day, I ended up catching, I want to say, most of my way fish in the first few hours on a wacky rig, the wacky rig Docho. And I kind of took a gamble on that, and I caught a couple really good ones on some of the banks you're going to see later. And at that point, I went to my backup pattern. Well, on the second day of the event, I had 18 pounds by about 9 o'clock. And so I decided, hey, you know what? The last few hours of today, I'm going to go figure out a backup pattern that does not include spawning smallmouth. And so I went offshore and found a little rock pile on the side of a point using my Garmin Panoptics, and I was able to scan and find these boulders set up on the side of this point. And when I found it in practice, I actually threw that Ned rig out there and caught like a 320, a 3-pounder, a 295, and broke one off in a matter of like 10 minutes when I found it. And I left it and went to some other stuff, caught about 14, 15 pounds doing other stuff. Well, anyways, that comes to the main event, as I would almost call it, is my last 40 minutes of the event on day 4. I needed a big one. I needed a couple big ones, really, in my mind. And when I got to my secondary spot, there was 2.5-foot rollers on it. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, fishing a Ned rig and 2.5-foot rollers is not a very good situation. But I was prepared for that. The night before, I'd rigged up a little 1/4-ounce jig head with a weed guard on it. I know you're shocked, weed guards, you know. But I'll explain why I was doing that. But I rigged up this 1/4-ounce jig head, and I actually put on the new Strike King 3.25-inch rage swimmer. I think we just released this at ICAST this past year. And you know, for years I threw the 3.3 Kitech, and it was my favorite size of Kitech. And the reason is because I felt like it really matched of shad across the country. Like, you could literally pick up that 3.3 and catch them everywhere on it. But the only thing I never liked about the Kitech is it tore up all the time. Like, literally, like, I swear it was like 1 fish per bait all the time. Well, this Rage Swimmer still has that great action of that Kitech, but it doesn't tear up. Like, I literally can catch 6, 8 fish on one bait and not ever have to worry about changing. I can get right back into the action. Well, as soon as I pulled up on that secondary deal, I cast my swim bait out there, let it go to the bottom, and that's where the weed guard came into play. I started slowly dragging it on the bottom, almost like a worm. And I'm swimming it through those boulders. One eats it, I miss it. Reel back in, a couple casts later, had the exact same thing happen. But this time, I didn't reel it away from the rock. I let the bait drop back down. The fish ate it, 3.5 pounds. It ended up being the winning fish for me. Next cast, caught another one that coiled. Picked up a spinning rod with a shaky head, a heavy shaky head, caught another one. Picked up a heavy Ned rig, caught another one, and then it was time for me to come in. But all in all, the Rage Swimmer, the 3.25-inch Rage Swimmer, got the job done. And it's funny, on day 5, which you're gonna see here pretty quick, that FLW shot, the next day I went out with FLW, and they wanted to see if a non-weed guard jig head would swim through those rocks. So we rigged one up, and we got hung every single cast in those boulders without the weed guard. So I'm telling you right now, the weed guard makes a difference when we're dragging a swim bait on the bottom. But for this, I was using 8-pound test fluorocarbon, Invisex fluorocarbon, a Magnum Hammer Team Loose Custom Pro. It's just one of my favorite rods. It's kind of like that Doc Sniper rod. I throw everything on this rod. I throw a chatterbait. I throw worms on it. I throw ochos on it. I mean, I pretty much throw everything on this rod. I just like it. It's just a confidence rod for me. But I was using a loose custom speed spool, and the reason I was using the custom speed spool is it comes in a 6:8 gear ratio, and when you're reeling that swim bait on the bottom, that slower gear ratio makes a really big difference as far as keeping bottom contact. A lot of guys will go to 7:1, and I feel like they kind of lift that swim bait a little bit too fast, and I can fish this one much more efficiently on the bottom. But basically, you know, I kept it pretty simple. If you look at any of the videos of me fishing this week, I had, like, on average about 6 to 7 rods on the deck, and that's about 15 fewer than I typically have on the deck. I typically have heaping piles on both sides, but I was pretty dialed in this week. It was a very, very good week at Lake Cherokee. But hey, now let's go take a look at my GPS, and I'm going to show you exactly what I was looking for to catch these bass. So this week at Lake Cherokee, my pattern was really specific. I was looking for spawning smallmouth and real subtle turns in the bank. If you look here at the map, this is not a straight bank. This is the type of bank that I targeted. This is actually a bank that I caught, I want to say, a 4-pounder, a couple of nice 3-pounders off of during the event. And if you notice right here on this bank, there's little subtle turns all along the bank. And I wasn't looking for big creeks. I wasn't looking for big pockets. I was looking for these small turns that were just barely sheltered out of the current. The river channel was right next door, and I think that was really important for those fish that were coming. So like every day I felt like there was new fish that were moving into some of these stretches, and the more main lake, the closer you got to that river channel that you could be, the newer fish will pull into spawn. And I think that was part of my success, especially day 3 and day 4, is staying in those general areas where those fish were pulling up. But if you notice here on the map, a lot of the places that I was fishing were little bitty turns. I mean, like the size of your boat, just like barely an indentation more so than anything. And a lot of my competitors would pull in there, make a cast on this side, a cast on that side, and go to the next one. Well, actually what it was is these little indentions the size of my boat would actually have 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 fish in them. And if you notice in the video footage of me catching my fish this week at Cherokee, or last week at Cherokee, you notice that I'm actually picking apart every single rock with that wacky rig docho. And that's how I was successful catching those fish on Cherokee, was paying attention to those small little details and catching those fish. And the smallmouth in Cherokee, you know, they were set up perfect for me this week, and was a lot of fun.
Man, this is going to be close. All right, here we go. I want both of you guys to watch it with me. We're making television. Andrew Upshaw, for the win, you need 14.4. A 5 bass limit today worth 15 pounds, 6 ounces. Your champion is Oklahoma's Andrew Upshaw. 67 pounds and 10 ounces. Wow! Man, that's fun. To present the winner's check on behalf of Lawrence Electronics, I'd like to welcome to the stage Doug O'Hara. Wow, he gets it done! 2 late calls for Andrew Upshaw means he is your champion here, stop number 5 at Cherokee Lake. Wow!